My Playful Wife, Episode 14, Distance and Closeness, written by Mia. January came cold and clarifying. There is a quality to Delhi in January that the rest of the year lacks, a thinness to the light, a hardness to the mornings, the fog burning off slowly to leave everything looking scrubbed and exact. I have always found it the most honest of the city's seasons. The summer lies to you about how much you can bear. The monsoon lies about how clean things are, but January tells the plain truth, that it is cold, that the days are short, that you should put on the second sweater and stop pretending. I had come, this year, to value things that told the plain truth. The season suited the person I was becoming. Saloni started a new project. A commission, the biggest she'd had by a distance. A boutique wanted a full collection from her rather than the individual pieces she'd done before. A coherent body of work with a through line, 12 garments that would speak to each other. It was the kind of opportunity that arrives once and tests whether you are who you've been telling yourself you are, and she took it the way she took serious things. Quietly, with no announcement, by simply beginning. She set up the spare room as a workspace. Within a week it had transformed. Bolts of fabric stood against the wall in a row, leaning at their various angles like a crowd waiting for something. Her sketchbook lay open at all times, on the table, on the floor, on the arm of the chair, wherever the idea had last caught her. There was thread on the carpet and pins in places pins should not be, and the particular productive disorder of a person who has gone deep into something real and stopped maintaining the surfaces. I learned not to tidy it. I learned that what looked like chaos was a working memory externalized, that the thing on the floor was on the floor because she needed to see it from the doorway, that moving anything was moving a thought. I learned to work around this the way you learn to work around any central fact of a shared life. I brought Chai to the doorway when she was absorbed and set it down without speaking and went away. I learned not to interrupt the silences that were working, and this was a real skill, harder than it sounds, because there's a kind of silence that feels like an invitation and isn't. I learned the difference between the silence of concentration and the silence of being stuck. They look identical from outside and are opposite in their need. Concentration wants to be left alone. Stuckness wants, secretly, to be interrupted, wants an excuse to look up and find that the world is still there. I learned to read which was which from the set of her shoulders, the speed of her hand, the specific quality of her stillness. Concentration was a held thing, taut, purposeful. Stuckness was a slack thing, the pencil not moving, the gaze gone past the page to the wall. When I read Stuckness, I would come in with a chai and a remark about nothing and let her surface, and she would let herself be surfaced, and neither of us ever said that this was what was happening. We had always been good at the practical architecture of living together, who did what, when the dividing of a life into manageable territories. That had never been our problem. What we were becoming good at now was the emotional architecture, which is a harder build. Knowing when to be present and when to be absent, when a silence is a wall, and when it is a room you're being invited into, how to be near someone who is deep inside themselves without either abandoning them or pulling them out. 3 years of marriage had taught us the practical. The hard year had forced us, finally, into the emotional, the way a flood forces water into rooms it never reached before. The Bengaluru trip was planned for February. A long weekend, Thursday to Sunday, for days. Our first time staying in the same city as Piyush since his move. Our first time as guests in the life he'd built rather than hosts of the life he'd left. Saloni was excited in the way she got excited about things she cared about. Contained, forward-leaning, the energy turned inward rather than spilled out. She didn't talk about it much, but I would catch her in the evenings, doing the small forward planning that excitement does, looking at the weather there, mentioning a thing she wanted to bring for Mira, asking once, idly, whether I thought Piyush's flat would have good light for the morning, as though the quality of my brother's morning light were a thing she'd been turning over. I was something more complicated than excited. I had been in a particular relationship with Bengaluru as an idea for the better part of a year. In my mind, it was not a city. It was a destination in the moral geography of what had happened to us. It was the place that had absorbed my brother, and, with him, something I was still in the slow process of letting go. It was the distance that had, by some paradox I had stopped trying to fully untangle, drawn my marriage closer, as though Saloni and I had needed the room that is leaving made, the way a plant needs space cleared around it before it will put out new growth. Bengaluru, in other words, was the place where the pressure had been released, and I did not entirely know what it would feel like to stand inside it. To stand in Piyush's actual apartment, with Mira at his actual side, in the actual rooms where the next phase of all our lives was being assembled. I did not know whether the new geometry, so steady here, in our flat on our ground, would hold its shape in that other air. "You're thinking about it too much," Saloni said one evening. She was at the sketchbook. She hadn't looked up. "How do you know I'm thinking about anything?" "You get still," she said, still drawing. "When you're thinking hard about something, you go completely still, like a held breath. Most people fidget more when they think. You stop. It took me years to learn it meant the opposite of calm." I looked at her, bent over the page, the lamp on her hair. 3 years of marriage, and she had been watching me too. All that time I'd been failing to see her, she'd been quietly compiling me, learning my tells, building the private dictionary of a husband she would one day need to read in an emergency. The thought moved me more than I expected. The watching had not been one-directional. I had simply been the last to start. "The trip," I admitted. "I know." She put down the pencil. She turned and looked at me properly. The full attention, nothing withheld, the lamp throwing half her face into warm light and leaving the other half soft. "It's going to be fine." "You don't know that." "I know Piyush," she said, "and I know you." A pause. "And I know that you both want the same thing. So I'm not worried. People who want the same thing find their way to it. It's only people who want different things who can't." "What thing?" I said. "What do we both want?" "To be in the same room," she said, "and have it be okay. That's all either of you has ever wanted, underneath everything. To be in the same room and have it be okay." I went still again, but a different kind of still, because she had reached back across the year and handed me my own words. I had said it to her months ago, in our kitchen, in the worst stretch of it, when I had not known whether there would be a marriage by spring. "I'm not asking for it not to have happened," I had said. "I'm asking to be in the same room. That's all. I'm asking to be in the same room and have it be okay." I had not known, saying it, whether it was possible. And here was my wife, a year later, holding the sentence up to me as a settled fact, as the thing that had turned out to be true. "You remembered that," I said. "I remember everything you say when you mean it," she said. "You don't say much when you mean it. It's easy to keep track." "Okay," I said. "Good," she said, and picked up her pencil, and the conversation was over, and the trip, somehow, had been disarmed. The distance that Bengaluru had created turned out, on arrival, to be navigable. Piyush's apartment was on the 4th floor of a new building with large windows and good light. Saloni was right to have wondered. The morning light came in clean and generous, nothing like the contested, building-shadowed light of our Delhi flat. He had furnished it with the efficiency of a person who had thought hard about what he actually needed rather than what was expected of a man with a salary. A good chair, a good table, not much else, and then not much given room to breathe. Mira was distributed through the space in the way a person becomes distributed through a place before they've formally moved into it. A book on the coffee table with her name in the front, a jacket over the back of a chair, a particular brand of tea in the kitchen that I knew was hers because Piyush had never in his life bought loose tea. She wasn't living there, but the apartment had already learned her. We arrived on Thursday evening, stiff from the flight and the auto rickshaw and the particular tiredness of travel. Piyush had cooked, really cooked, the dal I had teased him about in Delhi and a few other things, a whole table of it, better than I'd let myself expect. He'd been nervous, I could tell, the specific nervousness of a younger sibling hosting an older one for the first time, wanting the rooms to say what he couldn't. Look, I made a life, it's a real life, it's good. We ate at the table, the four of us, and it was, I want to say this accurately because accuracy is the whole project, simply nice. That is the entire truth of it, and it is a larger truth than it sounds. The conversation was easy, the food was good, and Piyush was visibly relieved that it was good. The evening was warm. We talked about his work and Saloni's collection and a film none of us had liked and Mira's parents, who were coming up in the conversation more and more, the way a person's family does when something is becoming serious. At some point the pairs dissolved and recombined the way they do at a good table. Piyush and me down one end on something technical, Saloni and Mira at the other on the collection, then a remark thrown across that pulled the whole table back into one conversation, then splitting again. The evening moved the way good evenings move, which is to say it moved without anyone steering it. After dinner, Mira and Saloni went out to the balcony. It was cooler than Delhi cool, a softer cold, and they took a shawl between them and stood at the railing, and I could hear them out there, the low run of conversation, the occasional laugh, the sound of two people who had become, over one Diwali and a winter phone calls, genuine friends. Piyush and I cleared the table. So, he said, stacking plates. So, I said, taking them from him. We worked in the comfortable silence of a task shared. The water running, the scrape of leftovers, the small domestic rhythm of two men in a kitchen who have, between them, learned how to be in a kitchen together. It had not always been comfortable, this silence. There had been a long stretch when any silence between Piyush and me was a held breath, a thing waiting to become a conversation neither of us could survive. This silence was not that. This silence was just two brothers doing the dishes. "This is good," he said finally, not looking at me, scrubbing at something stuck to a pan. "Yes," I said. "I wasn't sure it could be," he said. "Like this. All of us. In the same place eating dinner, and it just being dinner." He set the pan in the rack. I used to lie awake imagining this evening going 100 different ways, and they were all bad. And then it's just good, and I don't know what to do with how easy it turned out to be. "Neither do I said honestly. "I keep waiting for the bill to come." Saloni said the same thing at Diwali. "Maybe there isn't a bill. Maybe we already paid it." He looked at me then. "Thank you," he said. The same two words. For the same things. The word still full, still carrying its whole weight, even now. "Stop thanking me," I said. "We've established this. You've thanked me enough to last several lifetimes. Just make good chai, and we'll call it settled." He laughed and made the chai, and it was good chai, properly good. The boy had learned something in Bengaluru, and we carried the cups back toward the table and stood there a moment, the two of us, waiting for our wives to come in from the balcony. Our wives. The phrase landed strangely on me, as it always did, the possessive plural of a situation that had no proper grammar in any language I knew. Saloni was my wife. Mira would be his. But there was no clean word for the four of us, for the shape we made, for the way the two women on the balcony belonged to the same sentence in my mind. I had stopped looking for the word. Mira had taught me that not everything needs to be named to be real. They came in flushed from the cold and still talking, the shawl shared between their shoulders. Mira mid-sentence about something Saloni had said that had clearly delighted her. Saloni came and sat beside me at the table, close, her thigh against mine on the bench. Under the table, out of sight, her hand found mine. I held it. The four of us around the table with the good chai, in the apartment with the good light, in the city that had once been only an idea in the moral geography of my grief, and was now, it turned out, just a place where people I loved were building their lives. We stayed until Sunday, and the weekend did the thing good weekends do, which is to become, in memory, a single warm, continuous afternoon, though I know it had a Friday in it, and a Saturday and individual countable hours. Mira showed us her Bengaluru. Not the Bengaluru of anyone's brochure. Her one, the specific city a person assembles out of the place they actually live in, made of a handful of rooms and corners that means something. The filter coffee place where the man knew her order and started at the moment she walked in. A bookshop down a lane where she and Piyush had had their first real argument about something neither of them could now reconstruct, and made it up among the shelves an hour later, so that the shop had become, in their private map, the place where they'd learned they could fight and survive it. The small park where she went to think. She walked us through all of it with the slightly shy generosity of a person letting you into the actual rooms of their life, and Saloni received it the way she received everything offered honestly, completely, with real attention, asking the questions that proved she had been listening rather than waiting to speak. On Saturday evening it rained, briefly, the soft apologetic rain of a southern city, nothing like Delhi's violence. We crowded under a shopfront awning to wait it out. The four of us pressed into a small dry space with the rain coming down a hand's width away, and Saloni laughed at something Piyush said, and her laugh went up into the rain sound, and Mira leaned into Piyush's side, and I stood at the edge of the little group and understood, with a clarity that arrived like the weather had arrived, that the distance I'd been so afraid of, the Bengaluru-shaped distance, the thing I'd built into a whole moral geography in my head, was just a place, just a city where it sometimes rained. The closeness had not been left behind in Delhi to be visited and then surrendered at the airport. We had brought it with us. It turned out to be portable. It turned out to live in us, in the four of us, rather than in any particular set of rooms. That was the lesson of the weekend, if a weekend is allowed to have a lesson. Distance and closeness are not opposites. I had been treating them as opposites for a year. You can be far from someone and close to them. You can stand under an awning in the city that took your brother, getting rained on with all the people you love, and feel nearer to him than you had felt in the years when he lived 20 minutes away. We left on Sunday. The goodbye at Piyush's door carried none of the weight the old Delhi goodbyes used to carry. We would see them in weeks now, not months. Mira had already, in her ticket-saying way, named the next time before we'd left the first. She hugged Saloni. She shook my hand, firm and dry, closing her bracket. Piyush held the hug with Saloni a beat, and then held my hand for the beat that had become ours. "You came," he said, as though some part of him had not been sure all this time that we actually would. "We came," I said. "We'll come again." In the auto to the airport, Saloni put her head on my shoulder and slept the way she'd slept on the flight down, and I watched Bengaluru go past the window, just a city, green and ordinary, no longer the place where anything had been taken from me, and felt the closeness sitting in the seat between us, portable, ours, coming home with us to Delhi. To be continued in episode 15, The Collection.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 14 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
Ai mia.
Thank you for listening.